The Arkansas Senate debate was today, and it's one of the more important ones across our country. I have it for you, so here it is.
Contestants tonight, U.S. Representative Tom Cotton, the Republican nominee, Mr. Nathan LaFrance, representing the Green Party, U.S. Senator Mark Pryor, the incumbent and Democratic nominee, and Mr. Mark Swaney, candidate of the Green Party. The nominees will be questioned by a panel of Arkansas journalists: Michael Hiblin of KUAR Public Radio, Gwen Moritz of Arkansas Business, and Doug Thompson of Northwest Arkansas Media. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Each will have 1 minute 50 seconds to respond to a question, while rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. And at the conclusion of the broadcast, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of opening statements, questioning, rebuttals, and closing statements was determined prior to the appearance tonight by a drawing in which the candidates or their representatives participated. Our timekeeper is Elizabeth Lewitt of AETN, and with that, our first opening statement comes from Mr. Swaney.
Hello. Thank you for watching this debate. I'm with the Green Party. The Green Party is the only progressive political party in this Senate debate. The Green Party has certain principles that distinguish itself from the other parties. Sometimes I hear people say that they think that the Green Party is just like the Democrats, but this is not the case. The Green Party has 3 principles that we believe very strongly in to guide a lot of our positions on issues. They are peace, social justice, and protecting the environment. Early in his first term as a senator, Senator Pryor was a strong supporter of the Iraq War. That war in 2003 cost 4,477 lives of our finest Americans, added more than $1 trillion to our national debt, and did nothing to protect the United States of America. The Green Party believes that it is immoral and wrong to hire people to work and not pay them enough money to live during the time that they are working. And because of that, we support a living wage, which is more than a minimum wage. But Senator Pryor can't even support his own party's call for an increase in the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. He only wants to go as far as $8.25 an hour. And finally, the Green Party believes that climate change is the most serious problem facing the planet. And we believe that carbon tax is a necessary first step to begin to address this problem. If Senator Pryor voted for a bill in Congress that, had it passed, would have prevented Congress from even discussing a carbon tax. So these are just some of the differences between myself and the senator and the Green Party and the Democratic Party.
Swaney, thank you. Mr. Pryor, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank you for allowing me to be your senator. And I want to say that 12 years ago, you sent me to Washington to work in a bipartisan way to get things done for America and for Arkansas. That's exactly what I've done, and we've done a lot of good things together, from saving jobs in Texarkana to funding research at UAMS and Arkansas State, from making toys safe for our children, to shrinking the size of the federal government, but at the same time honoring the commitments we've made to our veterans. I believe I represent the best state in the Union and the best people in America. And I also believe that we have a lot at stake in this election. I don't know if you've heard the audio, but several months ago, Congressman Cotton went to a luxury resort in California to spend time with his billionaire donors. There's an audio tape on this where they brag about him as they introduce him for voting bill. It's a vote against Arkansas. You can hear the ovation on the tape for voting against Arkansas. That folks, he's not listening to you. He's listening to them. That applause is still ringing in his ear, and those dollar signs are still in his eyes. Congressman Cotton has allowed his ambition to get the best of him. He will do anything, say anything, vote however he can so that he can get their money to win this race. He has his billionaires, but I have you. That's all I've ever had, is you, the people of Arkansas. You've prayed for me. You've given me the courage to keep going. You've set my course. You've given me direction. That's why tonight I'm asking you for your vote on November 4th. I know that together we can keep America strong and keep Arkansas moving. That's what I mean when I say Arkansas comes first.
Mr. Pryor, thank you. Mr. LaFrance.
Good afternoon. I'd first like to thank AETN and the University of Central Arkansas for hosting this debate. It's an honor to be here among the other candidates for the U.S. Senate. I think during this debate you will find a distinct dichotomy between myself and the Libertarian Party platform and the other three candidates for U.S. Senate. What I mean is, though the Republicans, Democrats, Green Party have their own issues that they focus on, their own interest groups that influence how they vote in Washington, all three parties have one common goal. That is to grow the size of the federal government. It is to consolidate control and power over our lives in Washington, D.C., because that control means more money from special interest groups for campaigns, and it's a continuous cycle that I think needs to end, and end now. The overarching goal of my platform is to take this consolidated power in Washington, D.C., and diffuse it down to the state level, to the county level, to your communities, because this is America, and this was founded on local governance and a very limited federal government. But now we have a federal government that has a deficit of over $18 trillion. It's a federal government that both the Republicans and Democrats have controlled over the past 10 years, and no matter which party was in power, we saw spending grow. We saw the deficit grow. And I think it needs to end, and it needs to end now. So what I will bring to Arkansas and to the rest of the country is a voice in Washington for true limited government. I'm going to cut the federal government. I'm going to return that power back to you and your local communities. Thank you.
Mr. LaFrance, thank you. To Mr. Cotton.
Thank you. As I've traveled around the state of Arkansas for the last year, I've listened to Arkansans, from a truck driver in El Dorado to a nurse in Hot Springs to a farmer in Jonesboro. They're frustrated with Washington, and they should be. I haven't been in Washington very long, but I've been there long enough to know that it needs to change. Washington could use more of the common sense that I learned growing up on my parents' farm in Yell County. Washington could use more of the traits that I saw on display in Iraq, like leadership and courage as a combat infantry officer. Washington simply isn't working for Arkansas's families. Wages are down, prices are up. Obamacare is a disaster, and our national debt is almost $18 trillion. Parents are worried about the kind of future we're going to leave our kids. So am I. Ann and I were so excited last week to announce that we're expecting our first child, a baby boy. We want to make sure that our baby has the same kind of future that we all had, not a country that is poorer, with less opportunity, and less safe and secure. Unfortunately, that's the kind of future that Barack Obama's policies promise, because he's failed us here in Arkansas. And Mark Pryor has loyally supported the Obama agenda, voting with Barack Obama 93% of the time, casting a decisive vote for Obamacare, voting for every single penny of new deficit spending. Mark Pryor has said that Barack Obama doesn't offer a lot to rural America, to states like Arkansas. I agree. I just don't understand why he votes with him 93% of the time. Barack Obama has said his policies are on the ballot, every single one of them. I agree with that too. In Arkansas, those policies are called Mark Pryor. As you listen, I hope you'll agree there's a better way. Let's get our economy moving. Let's repeal Obamacare and start over in health care reform. Let's balance the budget, rebuild our military, and stop terrorists before they attack us here again. If you're ready for change, then I'm ready to serve.
Mr. Cotton, thank you. Our first question tonight goes to Mr. and it's from Michael Whitlam.
Mr. Pryor, I think a lot of Arkansans have been turned off by the negative attack ads in this campaign, especially those coming from outside groups, and the influence that these groups are having on this race. The Citizens United ruling was key. What do you think?
Well, I'm turned off by the negative tone as well. I wish that these outside groups, they really set the tone. These super PACs you're talking about because of Citizens United, they set the tone about 20 months ago. They've now spent over $20 million on television trying to get me out of the Senate seat to get my opponent into the Senate seat. And you have to ask why. And I think the answer is very clear, and that is what you see in this campaign playing out on your TV screens and playing out in your mailboxes is a business transaction. Here you have Congressman Cotton, who goes out here to hang out with his friends, his billionaire supporters out in the California resort. There's more on that audio tape that I mentioned a few moments ago. There's a point in there where he's in a room and they say, now, Tom, you're in a room full of investors. Why should we invest in you? I think that sums up the race pretty well. I've never heard it stated so clearly. They are investing in Tom Cotton just like they would invest in a company. Why? They want to get a payback on this investment, and they will. If he's elected to the Senate, they will get 6 years of paydays, because what he'll do is he'll do things like cut Social Security. He'll increase the age to 70 on Medicare and Social Security. He'll vote against farm bills. He'll do things like that to find the so-called savings over here. Then he'll turn around and give them enormous tax breaks over there. So Congressman Cotton is a good investment for them, and that's why they've spent well over $20 million on television trying to buy this Senate seat. But ladies and gentlemen, you know what? This seat is not for sale. He doesn't have the title to the seat. You do. It's up to you if you want a senator to listen to you. I'm your man, Mark Pryor. I look forward to having your vote on November 4th.
Mr. Pryor, thank you. Mr. LaFrance.
Thank you. I'm happy to say that I've not aired a single negative campaign ad here in the state of Arkansas, so I'm sure a lot of television viewers here will appreciate that. I mean, you can't turn on the TV today without seeing a half dozen of these ads every 30-minute program. And it really is a shame, because these negative ads are not informing the voters of Arkansas about what Senator Pryor or Congressman Cotton are going to do for them. They're just mere attacks on each other. They're not discussing the real issues, whether it's an attack ad, whether it's a personal ad, strolling down the street, or doing whatever. That's not telling you, the voter, what are they going to do for you in Washington, because that's what matters in the end. What they are going to do for you. And I can tell you that I will work for you, the Arkansan, every single day in the United States Senate. Now, the fact that I don't have big donors means that I don't have a lot of influence from outside parties. People that donate tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, these special interest groups, these super PACs, they're not doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They're doing it for a return on their investment, just like a business would. And for both the Democratic and Republican candidate, whoever would win, if they were to, they would expect that return on investment through their votes in their favor. There is no such influence with myself as a Libertarian Party candidate. I will work for you. You won't have to be a big-time donor to call my office or to come visit me in Washington to talk to me about the issues, because every single Arkansan every day will have access to me as their United States Senator.
Thank you, Mr. LaFrance. To Mr. Cotton.
Arkansans have it very tough in the Obama-Pryor economy. I think the last thing they want is to hear a bunch of politicians whining about the negative ads they see on TV. And frankly, I've dodged real bullets in the streets of Baghdad, so a few metaphorical bullets on a political campaign don't really bother me that much. What troubles me is the pain that Arkansans are facing because of the Obama-Pryor economy. Mark Pryor's been voting 93% of the time with Barack Obama. And unfortunately, what that's mean is real hardship for Arkansans. I think about the couple in El Dorado that Ann and I met on the campaign trail a few weeks ago. They're a two-income family. They both have jobs that they like. They have young children. They had to sell their mortgage and move in with their parents because the price of their health insurance had increased so much. I think of all the Arkansans who are struggling to find a job or whose wages aren't what they might hope. Look at where we've come in 6 years under Barack Obama. We've only created 28,000 full-time, yet we've added 88,000 people to the food stamp rolls. And 60,000 people have dropped out of the workforce altogether because they're so discouraged that they don't even want to look for work. Or think about what Obamacare has done. It's going to cost 2.5 million jobs. In Arkansas, we can expect to see premiums increase by 138%. Senator Pryor voted to cut Medicare by $700 billion to pay for Obamacare. And what's that mean? Arkansas seniors, over 4,000 of them are going to see Medicare Advantage plans canceled. I just saw one last week in South Arkansas. I've just gotten a cancellation notice because of those cuts. Time and time again, Mark Pryor has rubber stamped Barack Obama's big government agenda. And a vote for Mark Pryor is a vote for more of Barack Obama's policies.
Scott, thank you. To Mr. Swaney.
I'm glad you asked that question. It's a very good question. I'm not particularly disturbed by the negative content of these ads that come from out of state, but I am disturbed by the Citizens United decision that made them possible and inflated the huge sums of money that are now devoted to these campaigns. The Green Party is very opposed to this particular decision of the Supreme Court, Citizens United, because it leads to the concept of corporate personhood, the idea that a pile of paper is equal to an actual flesh and blood human being. This is something that we very strongly oppose. And as a result, we are in favor of and do support a constitutional amendment that would change the Constitution, would define human beings to be natural flesh and blood persons and nothing else. And therefore, we would like to see this decision overturned. A second decision that would also be overturned by such a constitutional amendment would be the Hobby Lobby decision, which we think is a very, very bad decision and goes into the realm of imagination, flights of fancy by the Supreme Court, where they imagine that a corporation can have religious feelings. This is simply into the realm of the ridiculous. Corporations already have a number of tremendous advantages over natural persons. And if we add to that by giving them even more advantages, we are all going to be building ourselves a bad life to live. So we oppose the Citizens United decision and support a constitutional amendment to repeal it.
Mr. Swaney, thank you. For rebuttal, Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Let me just say that the negative ads, in my view, are bad for our system. They sap people's confidence in our government. And I just think, the fog of misinformation that these ads create is not good for the system. Let me say, there's two things you never want to see in a political campaign when it comes to money. You don't want to see unlimited money, and you don't want to see secret money. And that's what you have with Citizens United. And I think it's bad for the system. I think it's corrosive. I think money has a corrosive effect. We're seeing it right here in Arkansas. This is the first election cycle we've seen it in the state. It's been around now for 2 or 4 years, so some other states have seen it. But it's the first time, and it's a pretty ugly picture. So I've already voted to change this system, and I will continue to work to change this system. I think the fact that the Supreme Court has said that Citizens United, can allow secret money and unlimited money, I think that's bad. And what it does is it diminishes the voice of real people and real Arkansans, and that's not good for the system.
Mr. Pryor, thank you. Our next question first from Gwen Morris, and it goes first to Mr. LaFrance.
I feel sorry for people who don't have DVRs, because every time I accidentally watch one of these political ads, I feel dirty. Some of them have already been called out for multiple Pinocchios and pants on fire, and yet they just keep going forward. And some of these are not from outside groups. Some of these are from the candidate's own campaign. So, along the same lines, what is the responsibility that you have, as a candidate, have for the tone of your ads? And are you responsible for making sure that your ads don't leave the voters misled about your position on issues that are really of critical importance in their lives?
Thank you. The Citizens United decision was definitely a tumultuous one, in that we now have all of these groups, in-state, out-of-state, that don't have to reveal where the money's coming from. They can air attack ads on whoever they want. They can spend however much they want. Personally, I think that the ads that we air, television, radio, should be informing the voters of Arkansas about what we would do while in office. The negative ads are just that. They're usually misleading people, or they take a single statistic and blow it out of proportion. And that's just not right. It's not fair to the voters who are trying to make an informed decision on Election Day. So, unfortunately, with the Supreme Court decision, right now there's not a lot that can be done with it, although I can say as a candidate, and I would encourage my other candidates to do the same, I would come out publicly and specifically say that I do not want this kind of support for my campaign. I do not want attack ads running against my opponents in my name or for my campaign. I just don't think that's the right way to run a campaign, and I don't think it's informative to the American people.
Mr. LaFrance, thank you. 2 minutes. Mr. Cotton.
I don't think Arkansans want to hear politicians whining about attacks on TV or radio or anywhere else. I think they want to hear solutions for Arkansas. And frankly, Barack Obama hasn't offered those solutions. Mark Pryor said he doesn't have a lot to offer rural states like Arkansas, yet Mark Pryor keeps voting with them 93% of the time. Here's what we need to do to address the real problems facing Arkansans when you look at falling wages or high unemployment or underemployment. We need to get back to basics. We need to balance our budget. We need to pass a balanced budget amendment, which I support and Senator Pryor opposes. We need to get our economy going again.
Are you answering my question about what your job as a candidate is? Or are you just doing talking points? Is it your responsibility as a candidate to make sure your ads are not misleading?
I have to allow him to go ahead because we have no provision for a follow-up question right away. Mr. Cotton, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I can only control the ads I run, and I'm proud of the campaign we've run, the campaign that's talking about solutions for Arkansans, about trying to balance the budget, passing a balanced budget amendment, get our economy going again so we can put more people back to work, not on the food stamp rolls, which is what's happened in the Obama-Pryor economy. 28,000 full-time jobs, but 88,000 people on food stamps. Real wages falling by 5%. Or if you look at what's happened nationwide, the top 5%. People who live off assets and investments, they're doing okay under the Obama-Pryor economy. They're actually seeing their incomes go down. But people who live off their labor, who have to work to put food on the table for them and their families, they've seen their incomes decline. Because Mark Pryor always stands with Barack Obama for higher taxes and more spending. Laws like Obamacare or more big government regulatory programs. I don't think that's right for Arkansas. And that's why I don't think Arkansans are ready to cast a vote for Mark Pryor, because they know that a vote for Mark Pryor is a vote for Barack Obama.
On to Mr. Swaney.
Answer the question. I believe that a candidate is 100% responsible for every piece of advertising that comes from that candidate's campaign. And I believe that that candidate should be held to account if the media is able to show that those ads are misleading and untrue. And that should be enough disincentive for candidates to lie and attack ads. So I think that's a pretty direct answer to that question. I would like to say further, though, on a separate subject, if I'm allowed, that I am opposed, as the Green Party is opposed, to the death penalty. This subject has not been discussed much in the Senate race, but I want everybody to know that I am opposed to the death penalty. And when I am lucky enough to be elected to the United States Senate, I will work very hard to eliminate the death penalty in the federal system. And I wanted to make that statement in case I didn't get a chance to say so otherwise. Thank you.
Mr. Swaney, thank you. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Swaney, thank you. Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. And Gwen, I want to thank you for that question, because I am responsible for the content of my own television ads. And one of the differences in the two campaigns here, and members of the media know this, is whenever we release an ad, we provide documentation to that ad of every fact that's in there, every vote, every statement. We put the context in there, and this is something I sat down with my campaign team on day one, and I said, look, one of the things we want to see about the Pryor campaign is integrity. The people of the state of Arkansas deserve that. They deserve honesty when it comes to campaigning. Now, one thing you just heard about from my opponent, and one thing you've seen on his ads, is his rhetoric is very clever, and that's great for advancing his political career. That's going to help him climb the political ladder. But the problem is that Arkansans are smarter than that. Our voters in Arkansas are amazingly independent and smart voters. Time and again, you'll see, in fact, I can talk from experience in some of my races. Back in 2002, I won the state very big, and so did Mike Huckabee. And you can find these kind of election results in basically every given election cycle. People here are stubbornly independent. They don't like to be told about a bunch of misinformation and bad information. In fact, most people I talk to, when they now see the ads come on television, they hit the mute button. I hear that over and over and over. And again, like I said in my previous answer, it's not good for our system. We need to change this. We need to either get the U.S. Supreme Court to reverse Citizens United, or do campaign finance reform, or actually amend the Constitution to make sure this doesn't happen in the future.
Mr. LaFrance.
Thank you for the opportunity for rebuttal here. Again, I would just reiterate what I already stated, and that is that the money being donated, not money being donated by people like you and I, $10, $25, but the money being donated by the large special interest groups, by the unions, by the wealthy individuals, Wall Street banks, big corporations across the country. That money is not being donated to these campaigns because they have a strong political belief or because they think it's the right thing to do. They are making an investment in every candidate that they throw money at. And that's an investment that you and I and the rest of the people across this country cannot afford to make. And so our voices are not heard in Washington. I'm going to change that. There is no special interest influence in my campaign on me as your U.S. Senator, and I will work every day for you, the people of Arkansas, and no one else.
Next question comes from Mr. Thompson, goes first to Mr. Cotton.
Mr. Cotton, there's open war in Syria and Iraq. There's something that looks a whole lot like undeclared war going on in the Ukraine. And our soldiers, for a couple of decades, our service personnel of all the branches of the service have been asked a lot, ranging from extended deployment to the giving of their lives, and it's all been very expensive. What strategy should we have to contain the threats such as these that can be applied in a bipartisan manner over a long course of time that we can afford?
The most fundamental responsibility of our government is to keep America safe. And Barack Obama's foreign policy of weakness, hesitation, and indecision has made America face greater risks in the world. Unfortunately, Mark Pryor has been rubber stamping that foreign policy. If we look at what's happening in Iraq and Syria with the Islamic State, they are rampaging across the region. They're beheading Americans. They're crucifying Christians. They're burying people alive. And this is happening because Barack Obama failed to take the advice of his generals in 2011 when they asked for a small stay-behind force. Not of frontline trigger pullers like my soldiers and I were in Iraq in 2006 when we were fighting the precursor group of the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but trainers, planners, advisors. And because of that decision, we lost our leverage with the Iraqi government. We called into question the trustworthiness of the United States among allies in the region, and we allowed Al-Qaeda in Iraq to regroup, to move to Syria, to take advantage of the vacuum there. And they're not just a terrorist group now, they're a terrorist army. They're the most well-financed organization potentially in modern times. And if we don't stop them, they're going to continue to rampage across the Middle East, and they could attack us here in the United States. Their own leader, when he was released from captivity last decade of war, said, "I'll see you guys in New York." The president doesn't have an effective military strategy. He has a political strategy to get us beyond November 4th. What we need is to take it seriously. And no serious leader, certainly no commander-in-chief, would ever take any option off the ground, including boots on the ground, because the Islamic State certainly isn't taking any options off the table. Yet Barack Obama does that, and Mark Pryor once again rubber stamps his failed policies.
Mr. Cotton, thank you. Mr. Swaney.
It's a very difficult situation. You could go on and on about why you think the situation got so bad and what could have been done differently. But I think that war is generally a bad idea. I usually don't support it. But I am not a pacifist, and I believe there are two reasons that I personally will support military action. One of those is to defend the United States against attack, and a second one is to put an end to mass human rights violations. It's my judgment that the situation in Syria and Iraq with ISIS meets both those criteria. And I support military action to destroy ISIS. I think Congressman Cotton was correct when he listed the vast quantities of human rights violations being committed by these people, reported by independent observers from all over. but I think that Congress needs to authorize it. And I think we need to seek support from the United Nations. And I think we need to seek support from other Islamic countries. And I think that that support also should go to helping defray the cost of this, because ISIS is a threat to the entire world, not merely to the United States. Briefly speaking about Ukraine, we have no business messing around there. I have a strong suspicion that we initiated that problem, and it's a blowback case. If the Russians were trying to influence a group of people in Mexico to illegally overthrow the Mexican government and put in a government in Mexico that was hostile to the United States, we'd be very upset. I think we need to be working constructively with the Russians. We have common enemies. And we need to be working constructively with the Chinese. We have common enemies.
Swaney, thank you. Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. And before I answer this question, Congressman, let me say thank you for your service. Let me talk about ISIS here for just one moment. I want to be very clear about this. My number one priority as your senator is to keep America safe from terrorism. And ISIS is a terrorist organization. They're basically a terrorist army. We must meet threats like this head on. ISIS, that's why I support the airstrikes in order to damage ISIS, and we have to destroy their capability to harm America. Whenever it comes to something like this, I have three criteria, and this isn't new. This is something I created in the campaign. This is something I talked about probably in my first month in the Senate when President Bush was in office. First, there must be a clear national security threat. Second, there must be a clear mission with definable and attainable goals, and that means we know when we hit an end state, in other words, when the job is done. And third, there must be an international coalition, preferably with regional partners in there who are bearing the burden alongside Americans and putting themselves at risk, just like Americans are in harm's way. Now, I'm not quite sure what Congressman Cotton's criteria is when it comes to something like this, but it seems that he's arguing for a more open-ended commitment in Iraq. One of the interesting things about his voting record is he's for nation building. He's voted to do things like spend billions of dollars in places like Afghanistan for schools and roads and hospital, but he's voted to cut schools, roads, and hospitals here in Arkansas. I believe that for us to be strong at home, well, for us to be strong abroad, we have to be strong at home.
Mr. Pryor, thank you. To Mr. LaFrance.
Thank you very much. Again, I'd like to also thank Representative Cotton for his service. It's greatly appreciated. When it comes to ISIS and the terrorist threat in the Middle East, I think as Americans we need to take a pause, take a look in the mirror and realize a lot of this is our own doing. This began with the Bush administration's decision to invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein with no plan about what to do after that happened. That left a significant power vacuum that we're still 10 years later dealing with. We helped install a prime minister that was very discriminatory against certain factions in Iraq that did not bring the country together. He was our guy, and he helped to divide that country even further. And in fact, ISIS has gained such a stronghold there because there's such division and because so many Iraqis don't trust their own government. They would rather trust someone associated with their own religious sect. So ISIS being what it is now is a threat. I think we need to take some action, but it's not unilateral. This has to be an international effort. Middle Eastern countries, European countries, the United States, and others, to ensure that we defeat this threat and then allow these countries that have been dealing with wars within their borders for years and decades to finally heal, to finally have democracy, to finally have some self-control over their own future and their own governance. So I think that's the way to approach this. Now, Representative Cotton, I do disagree with him on some foreign policy issues. One major one was his support of Barack Obama's effort to interact with Syria last year. Barack Obama wanted to bomb Syria, arm Syrian rebels, even though a quarter to a third of those rebels were terrorists. And Tom Cotton supported that, while 500 to 1 Arkansans opposed it. I think Tom Cotton is generally wrong on foreign affairs, and I think I will provide safety and security for America.
Mr. LaFrance, thank you for rebuttal. Mr. Cotton.
When you're in combat, you learn some basic lessons, and those lessons don't just apply on the front lines, they apply in relationships among nations. When we would go into a new sector in Baghdad, we'd set up a security perimeter. We'd dismount, our weapons would be at the ready. If you look hard and tough, your enemies will think you are hard and tough. But if you pull up and you lollygag around, you get out and your weapons are hanging by your side, you'll look weak and soft, and people will be ready to take a strike at you. Barack Obama has made America look weak and soft in the world. And Senator Pryor has been weak and unsteady when it comes to our safety and security. A year ago, when I was a lonely voice calling for action against our enemies in Syria, Senator Pryor, even after Hillary Clinton called and asked him to support it, said no. Just 4 months ago, he wrote an amendment that would have prohibited the very action that he voted to support just last month, which is supporting Syrian opposition forces against the Islamic State. I don't know what changed in the meantime. Maybe Barack Obama said he needed Senator Pryor's vote. And whenever Barack Obama says he needs Senator Pryor's vote, then he gets Senator Pryor's vote.
All right. Next question comes from Mr. Hiblin, and it goes first to Mr. Swaney.
There's been talk about food stamps today, and the Farm Bill passed this year includes funding for the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, commonly known as food stamps. They've been linked for decades. Should they be linked?
Yes, I think so. Farm Bill is worth about $100 billion a year, this new one. About $80 billion of that is for the food stamp program, and I support that food stamp program, and I believe that the food stamp program should stay in the Farm Bill because the money goes to farmers that grow the food that feed Americans. And I actually find it a little offensive that people in Congress who give away sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars worth of advantages to the richest people in this country, starving our federal government of needed revenue, and don't care anything about the effect that it has on our deficit, on the other hand, seem to think that, oh, it's just terrible that some Americans are getting food to eat and that the people that grew that food are getting paid some money to do that. I think that's unconscionable. I think it's wrong. And I do support the food stamp program, and I support it being part of the Farm Bill. There are some other aspects of the remainder of the funding of the Farm Bill that I have some differences about. I think too much of that remainder of that money in the Farm Bill does go to wealthy farmers and not enough to the less well-off farmers. I also think it doesn't make the right priority choices for agribusiness in terms of the environmental choices that our agribusiness uses. And so I think there could be improvements in the Farm Bill, but I do not wish to see it divorced from food stamps.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Pryor.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, the Farm Bill is a very important piece of legislation for Arkansas. In fact, I think you could argue that of any bill that Congress passes in any given 5-year period, the Farm Bill is probably the most important to Arkansas. It covers about 25% of Arkansas's economy, because about 25% of our economy is agriculture or ag-related. There is a clear difference in the two of us in this race, because Congressman Cotton voted against the Farm Bill. He's the only member of the Arkansas delegation to do that. Every indicator that I ever received from anybody in Arkansas was that we should support this legislation because it's good for Arkansas. And let me tell you something. This is not just about the farmers. So much of this legislation is about rural America. Things like rural electricity, rural water, rural broadband. All of those things are in the Farm Bill. We need the Farm Bill to pass to help rural Arkansas stay competitive and connected into the global economy. You asked specifically about the food stamp program. And my opponent, as we all know, has been talking about the food stamps and how the president has hijacked the food stamp bill. I think that's why it's either the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times this week ran a little cartoon, I don't remember which one, where they gave out fake Nobel Prizes, and the one they gave to Congressman Cotton was for political fiction. It was because of his ads like that just don't connect to the real issues in Arkansas. His rhetoric is very good. He talks a good game, but the truth is that does not help Arkansas's farmers. That doesn't help people in rural Arkansas or rural America.
Mr. Pryor, thank you. To Mr. LaFrance.
Thank you, sir. As far as food stamps being associated with the Farm Bill, I'd like to solve that problem by eliminating the Farm Bill, by eliminating the food stamp program. Nowhere in our Constitution did our founding fathers give the federal government the authority to take income, to take wealth, to take earnings from one person or one group of people and give it to other people at their own discretion. That's not freedom, and that's not an American quality. I believe issues such as helping out those struggling to meet ends meet and have food on their tables, or helping people with housing, these kind of issues should be dealt with in the private sector by private charitable organizations. Let the American people keep their tax money. Let us decide what causes are best to give to, not politicians in Washington. This is an example of what I spoke about in my opening statement, that this consolidation of power and this continual power grab in Washington is an attribute of all of my opponents and their parties. This is because things like the Farm Bill, food stamps, other goodies that they throw into these bills get doled out to supporters, to people that donate to their campaigns. And it's wrong. The federal government and the elected officials there have no business in taking our money and deciding to give it to other people at their own discretion. We, the American people, are smart enough, we're compassionate enough to make those decisions ourselves. We'll give our money to the best-run charitable organizations that help the most people the most efficiently, rather than having it confiscated by Washington politicians and doled out to whoever they please. That's wrong, and if I'm elected, I'm going to work to fix it.
Mr. LaFrance. To Mr. Cotton.
I think we need a real farm bill that's focused on farmers, and a food stamp reform bill that's focused on getting people the help they need without waste and abuse. I voted for those bills in Congress. But Senator Pryor and Barack Obama insist on doing things the old way, keeping them combined. That's the status quo. If you're happy with the status quo with $18 trillion in debt, then that's probably the way you want it. But I want to solve problems. I grew up on our parents' small family farm in Yale County. From the time I was 5 years old, I was out with my dad working. I was probably too small, but I think my mom was sick and tired of being my dad's farmhand. So I went out there early, smaller than a square bale that I had to kick out of the back of a truck. I learned a lot of lessons from my parents on that farm. One lesson I learned is you can't keep spending more money than you take in. And I learned that it's not enough to live within your means. You have to live below your means, because you have to save for a rainy day. That's what we need to be doing in Washington, D.C. We need a farm bill that's truly focused on the needs of farmers, and I voted for one. But we also need a food stamp bill that's focused on getting people the help they need without the waste and abuse, or the institutionalized fraud that you see from a lot of liberal states like Illinois or Massachusetts that game the system so they can enroll more people on food stamps. We don't have that problem here in Arkansas, but guess what? Your taxpayer dollars are paying for it. The farm bill that ended up passing was a bad deal for Arkansas farmers and taxpayers. It was almost $1 trillion in new spending. The food stamp program has grown under Barack Obama by almost 70%. Arkansas farmers can only expect to get about 0.5% of the benefit of that bill. And almost 75% of them, cattlemen like my family, other livestock producers, can expect to get nothing. I think that's a bad deal. That's why, and once again, a vote for Mark Pryor is a vote for those failed Barack Obama policies.
To Mr. Swaney, rebuttal.
Well, this is an interesting discussion. We're talking about the national debt and the cost of running the federal government. And I often believe that the Republican Party exists for one reason and one reason only, and that is to ensure that rich people pay the lowest possible tax. And they do that by starving the federal government of revenue, thus driving up our national debt. They did that by reducing the capital gains tax. They did that by eliminating the inheritance tax. They did that by refusing to pass new taxes. They did that with Bush tax cuts. They did that by allowing corporations to keep I forget however many trillion dollars offshore so they didn't have to pay tax by bringing it back to the United States. And yet these same people find it unhappy that they need to reduce spending by taking money from the Women's, Infants, and Children's program. These are people that don't care if babies starve. They love their ideology more than they love human beings.
Swaney, thank you. Next question from Ms. Moritz, and it goes first to Mr. Pryor.
If you are elected, or in your case, Senator re-elected, What would you like to see happen to the Affordable Care Act? And please include in your answer exactly what effect your proposal would have on the 200,000 Arkansans who are now insured by the Arkansas private option and those who have employer-sponsored plans.
Yes, thank you for that question. And I do want to talk about some specifics here in just a moment, but please remember that before the Affordable Care Act passed, people in Arkansas could be and were routinely denied health insurance if they had a pre-existing condition. In fact, they were one bad diagnosis away, one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. Back then, the insurance companies had all the power. We needed to put patients back in charge of their health care. Now, I do support changes to the law, I do, but I don't want to go back to those days. My opponent, Congressman Cotton, has already voted to go back to those days. He's already voted to allow insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions to be denied coverage by health insurance companies. This is important to me. A few weeks ago, I was at church, and a guy came up to me and gave me a big hug, and he said, "Thank you for voting for the Affordable Care Act." And he said, "I'm a diabetic. I have not had private health insurance in 15 years, but now I do." Congressman Cotton wants to take that away from him. I don't. Some of the things that specifically about the private option, I think we need to keep the private option. I want to give a lot of credit to the Republican legislature and the Democratic governor to work together to get that worked out. I hope we keep the private option. Right now we have well over 200,000 Arkansans on the private option and about 40,000 or so on the exchange. That together is about 250,000 Arkansans that have private insurance today that didn't have it a year ago.
Mr. Pryor, thank you. Mr. LaFrance.
Thank you. Very succinctly, the Affordable Care Act needs to be repealed in its entirety. It has been a disaster for the United States. Health costs are skyrocketing. Patient care is plummeting. I've talked to doctors throughout Arkansas and throughout the United States, and they've made one thing clear. They're focused on their computer screens when they're talking to patients, making sure they put in the right keywords, they put in the right codes, because of the mandates of the Affordable Care Act. Their focus has gone from patient care to dealing with the Affordable Care Act and federal government regulations on health care. And that's wrong. So the first step is to repeal Obamacare. The second step is to get government. A long time ago, health insurance used to be affordable for Americans, and it was really an insurance product. Today, it's not affordable for a lot of people. Costs go up tremendously every year, and it's a system that's just out of control. A big part of that was because of the founding of Medicare, Medicaid, and then the enormous expansions we've seen over the decades have driven up prices, reduced quality of care for all of us. Health insurance in this country isn't really insurance anymore. Think about your auto insurance. If you took Obamacare and the current structure of health insurance and applied it to your car, your insurance would pay for your fill-up at the gas station. Your insurance would be paying for your next oil change. That's not what insurance is about. Insurance is to protect us against catastrophic illnesses in our family so that we can survive and continue to thrive. Right now, it's simply a transfer of wealth from healthy people to ill people. It's gotten worse under Obamacare. We need to repeal it and then restructure the entire system from there.
To Mr. Cotton.
Obamacare has been a disaster for Arkansas, for our entire country. And Mark Pryor cast a decisive vote for Obamacare. He's responsible for that law and its negative consequences today. I think of all the people I've met across the state of Arkansas, I could tell so many stories. One story I want to tell is of a dentist in the River Valley and his wife who runs the dental office where he practices. They lost their health insurance. They lost it because their health insurance wasn't Obamacare compliant. It didn't have all the benefits that they wanted or that Obamacare demanded. For example, it didn't have pediatric care or neonatal care. There are some couples obviously need and want those provisions. Anna and I, expecting our first child, need those provisions in our health insurance, and we choose them. This couple is in their late 50s. They have grandkids. They don't have kids. Yet they lost their health insurance because Barack Obama and Mark Pryor thinks that government-run health insurance that dictates those choices to you is better than you and your families making those choices. And look at all the harms that Obamacare has imposed on us. 2.5 million jobs lost. We've facing up to 50,000 plans canceled here in Arkansas. $700 billion in cuts to Medicare to pay for Obamacare. Arkansas seniors just got over 4,000 cancellation notices of their Medicare Advantage plan, despite Mark Pryor and Barack Obama's promises that you can keep your plan if you like your... And billions of dollars wasted on a broken website. We can do better. We can repeal Obamacare and trust you as patients and families and doctors. Let you shop across state lines. Let individuals get similar tax treatment as small businesses or large businesses get. Let small businesses pool their resources together so they can negotiate better rates for their employees just like big businesses do. And it's not just Obamacare. When we start over in healthcare reform, we can take a program like Medicaid that has too much red tape and return it to the states and let states make those decisions for all their population. Mark Pryor says he wants fixes on Obamacare, but he never proposes any because Barack Obama won't propose any. And Mark Pryor always puts Barack Obama first, not Arkansas.
Mr. Swaney.
The Affordable Care Act is better than nothing. I have friends of mine, family members, who have been unable to visit a doctor for serious illness for years, who have now been able to go to the doctor. So I don't want to say that I think that the Affordable Care Act is a bad thing. It's a step, but only a step, in the right direction. For those who have very low incomes, it is affordable and possible then, for the first time, to see a doctor. This is a good thing. But there are many people that have a moderate income and are far from wealthy that can't afford the premiums for this Affordable Care Act. Not only that, the Affordable Care Act does nothing about the cost of medicine. And without some price discipline, you can expect that medical costs will continue to increase. Therefore, we'll continue to put more and more burden on the citizens and also on the government. Therefore, and because of these reasons, the Green Party continues to support and to call for national health insurance and to take the insurance industry out of medicine and remove the profits. We believe in the Green Party that basic medical care is a human right and that to deny it for any reason is basically a violation of human rights and in some cases might even be morally equivalent to murder. Other nations have done this and done a good job, and they get better outcomes for about half the cost because they have national health insurance. We're addicted to an idea that capitalism, like a religion, must always be right in every case, must always be the only solution for every problem. It is not. It does not work in the case of the medical industry, and we need national health insurance.
Rebuttal, Mr. Pryor.
Well, again, Gwen, thank you for that question. And let me give you 3 specifics on things that I do support. Contrary to what Congressman Cotton says, I don't support any changes. I'm the lead Democratic sponsor on repealing the Independent Payment Advisory Board. I'm the lead Democratic sponsor on a bill that would fix the exchanges for pastors and ministers. It's a technical fix, but nonetheless an important one. And I'm also supportive of repealing the medical tax device. So there's 3 things right there. But let me also get back to Congressman Cotton's answer on the Affordable Care Act. He had no answer at all for people with pre-existing conditions. None. In other contexts, what he's talked about is reestablishing the high-risk pool. Let me tell you something, Congressman. I'm a cancer survivor. I've lived this. I've been in the high-risk pool. It is not a good place to be. When we had the high-risk pool in Arkansas, we had over 20% of the people that did not have insurance. If we reestablish the high-risk pool, we're just throwing sick people to the wolves, and I don't support it.
Next question comes from Mr. Thompson, goes first to Mr. LaFrance.
Mr. LaFrance, President Obama has 2 years left in his last term. He is a lame duck. He is blocked by a hostile majority in the House. He has a Senate that at best is going to be pretty evenly and bitterly divided. This is a 6-year term for Senate you're running for. Would you please tell us what you hope to accomplish in that 6 years, most of which will not be under the administration of Barack Obama? And please don't mention Obama if you can give me an answer to that.
I appreciate that. What I would hope to accomplish is pretty simple. If elected, I want to leave office 6 years from now, or be reelected for another term potentially, with the federal government smaller than it is today, with the budget deficit gone and a balanced budget amendment in place. I'd like to see the income tax system be completely overhauled. We have a 75,000 plus page income tax system that companies have to hire armies of lawyers, accountants, CPAs just to deal with and try to find the loopholes that benefit them. It's ridiculous. Our laws that are made in Washington are supposed to be laws for the American people. The American people should be able to at least read and understand these laws. And in fact, most Republicans and Democrats in Congress don't even bother reading them themselves. And most of them don't understand what's in them. With the income tax system, I like to scrap it. Put the whole thing in a shredder, 80,000 pages, probably a very big mess. I like to replace it with a very simple national sales tax, also called the fair tax, where Americans pay a sales tax to the federal government on final consumer goods. This can almost eliminate the IRS, tremendous cost savings for Americans, and I think will be a big boost to our economy. In addition, like I said, I want to shrink the federal government. We have agencies abound, agencies that are tremendously bloated. They need to be cut down to size. We need to balance the budget. At the same time, I'd like to cut your tax burden as well, because the middle class right now is just under tremendous strain from the income tax system that they're facing, and it's hurting families all across Arkansas.
Mr. Cotton.
Well, Barack Obama can do a lot of damage in just 2 years. He's already done a lot of damage in 6 years, and that's why Arkansans are so disappointed in Mark Pryor for voting with him 93% of the time. I hope that we can start, though, in January, even with the president still in office, to get our economy moving again, because Arkansans are hurting. We've added 88,000 people to food stamps in the last 6 years with fewer than 30,000 new jobs. Wages are down almost 5%. How can we do that? Well, we need to start with tax reform. We need to reform our tax code. We now have some of the highest taxes in the industrialized world. That makes Arkansas and our country less competitive for jobs right here at home. We need to reform our regulatory process, get out-of-control agencies like the EPA back under control so we can have constitutional self-government, and so you can hold your elected representatives accountable for every rule or regulation that comes out of those agencies, as opposed to letting them point the finger at nameless and faceless bureaucrats. We need to untap our energy potential in this country. We've already seen what it can do for jobs in places in northern Arkansas because of the Fayetteville Shale. Look at what it's doing in places like North Dakota and the Bakken Shale, or out in Midland and Odessa in the Permian Basin. We could have gas prices that are falling, diesel prices that are falling, and we need to untap the potential of clean coal plants like you see in Fulton that hold the potential for lowering electricity prices for every Arkansan, for every American. Those are just a few of the things I hope to get to work on. But in these last 2 years, the president can still do a lot of damage, and some of that damage can last for generations. If he gets another Supreme Court justice nomination, or if he continues to pack the lower courts, then that will be an Obama echo that will last for decades. Mark Pryor has rubber-stamped almost every one of Barack Obama's judges. And if they had your way, you wouldn't have the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Our marriage laws would be overturned. We wouldn't be able to protect unborn life. That's not good for Arkansas, and that's another way in which Mark Pryor is a vote for Barack Obama.
To Mr. Swaney.
Good question, but I fear I won't have enough time to cover all the ground. First thing that I would like to see after the end of my 6 years as first term as a senator from Arkansas would have the government well on its way to taking action to solve the problem of climate change. I know we don't hear very much about it, but I read a lot about it, and I care about the future, and I care about the future of my children and my grandchildren. And if we don't, we're not very good human beings. We better get busy on it now. And I, number one, believe that we need to institute a carbon tax. Carbon tax refundable to lower and middle income persons that will eliminate the economic advantage that burning fossil fuels has right now over cleaner energy, thereby moving us away in stages from a carbon-based economy. The second thing I would like to do is tax Wall Street. I studied about this and I found some tremendous numbers. I'll try to say them fast. $1 trillion a day. $1 trillion a day just in America, just stocks and bonds. $383 trillion worth of financial transactions by Wall Street every year. Not one penny of it is taxed. It needs to change. I want to see a minimum wage increase to a living wage and put more money in the hands of working people, because that will bring jobs by reviving the economy, and the only way that it can be revived, and that is increasing consumer spending. I want to see a balanced budget and Social Security saved. Both of those things can happen by restoring the tax cuts, restoring the revenue taken away from the federal government by these tax cuts by those people who only care about the interests of the rich. And last, I would cut off aid to Israel. They don't need it, and I would seek better relations with China and Russia.
Sir, Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Doug, I want to thank you for asking that question on President Obama, because as you all noticed, and I'm sure the audience and the folks at home have noticed, is when he asked a question about negative ads, Congressman Cotton talked about Obama. When he asked a question about ISIS, Congressman Cotton talked about Obama. To ask a question about the Farm Bill, he talks about Obama. You see a pattern? Yes. Clearly, Congressman Cotton is running against one man. But I'm running for 3 million Arkansans. That's what this race is all about, and that's the difference in this race. I'm on your side. When I listen to you, when I come home and travel the state and hear what is on your mind, that's when I go to work. And Congressman Cotton loves to throw out these phony statistics about how much I've agreed with President Obama. You all know me. You know I don't agree with President Obama on a whole variety of things. Just take the Keystone Pipeline. Take his EPA regs on carbon. Take his cuts to Social Security. I disagree with him on that. I disagree with him last year on gun control. So much so that when I voted no on his legislation, Mayor Bloomberg of New York City ran ads in Arkansas criticizing me for standing up for your Second Amendment rights. So I disagree with Obama plenty, and yes, I've been disappointed in him, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But let me talk about my philosophy. My philosophy is this. If you look at the rankings of people that actually look at the Senate and how we vote, not the TV ads, not all the rhetoric and the spin, but actually look at how we vote, every year I've been in the Senate, every year, they have ranked me as the most or one of the most independent senators in Washington. That's because I listen to you. And you know, when President Bush was in office, there are times I agreed with him. There are times I took heat from my party for agreeing with President Bush. Arkansas comes first, and that's what I mean.
Mr. LaFrance for rebuttal.
Thank you. It's pretty simple what I'd like to do with my first 6-year term as your U.S. Senator. I'd like to take Arkansas' Senate seat that is up for election this year and give it back to citizens of Arkansas. Right now, 100 out of 100 seats in the Senate are controlled by interest groups of an array of areas and backgrounds, but one thing that associates them all is big money, big donations to campaigns, big influence in Washington, D.C. You are going to influence my decisions in Washington. What is best for you, what is best for Americans in America, will be what guides my decisions. One big issue I'd like to focus on is term limits for all members of the United States Congress. That would help end this perpetual cycle of fundraising, doling out benefits to big donors, fundraising again. I think we have to make big structural changes in Washington, and with your support, I will work to make it happen.
Next question from Mr. Hibland goes first for Mr. Cotton.
Congressman Cotton, for those of you who have served in Washington, you and Senator Pryor, which key pieces of legislation have you helped lead that you're most proud of? If you can name one, if you can also name one that you'd perhaps like to take back. And for those of you who haven't served, maybe what is your key priority, if elected?
Well, I haven't been in Washington very long, less than a year. But I've been there long enough to know, as Calvin Coolidge said, that it's just as important to stop bad laws as it is to pass good laws. And frankly, we've been stymied a lot over the last 2 years in trying to pass good laws, trying to reform Obamacare by preventing you from having to pay a tax if you can't afford a plan from Obamacare that you don't like, trying to stop businesses from having to pay a tax because they don't provide Obamacare-compliant employees, trying to stop Obamacare from turning our country into a part-time economy. Unfortunately, we've been stymied in that efforts because Mark Pryor and Barack Obama have let almost 400 bills from the House of Representatives pile up on the desks of the Senate. They won't even take an up or down vote on it. And look what's happening. 4,000 seniors just got cancellation notices of their Medicare Advantage plan here in Arkansas just a few days ago. Look at what happened at Walmart just last week. They announced that 30,000 part-time workers were going to lose their health insurance because of Obamacare, because of the cost it imposes on all workers at Walmart, following other companies like Target or Home Depot. Look at what's happening at a company like UPS. I've met many UPS employees all around the state of Arkansas who are losing coverage for their spouses because UPS had to cut spousal coverage for certain employees because of the costs Obamacare is imposing. This is very frustrating to me. It's very frustrating to Arkansans because they know that Washington is causing them this kind of pain, this kind of stress and dislocation. Yet we can't move forward because the Senate is in the hands of liberal Democrats like Mark Pryor, who are always going to protect Barack Obama's legacy and enforce his policies. That's why a vote for Mark Pryor is a vote for Barack Obama.
Mr. Swaney.
Well, one of the very important things that I would put at the top of my agenda is something we haven't heard from tonight, and that is a law passed dictating equal pay for equal work for working women of America. And I also will support strongly passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, long overdue. I studied and found that there have been 135 pieces of legislation passed by state legislatures in recent years, mostly dominated by Republicans, that provide negative restrictions on women's rights to choose their own, make their own decisions about reproductive issues. This qualifies rightly as a war against women, and I think it needs to be stopped. Women have never been treated equally in this country in its history so far to this day. And it's long past time that we remedy that. And an equal pay for equal work job bill would be on the top of my agenda. Additionally to that, something that I've already mentioned once and I'll mention again because it's very important, I think we need a tax on Wall Street. I think we need to restore revenue to the government. The government's been starved of revenue, contributing to our national debt. You can't cut spending very much more than it is already without hurting the nation in doing it. So I want to see a tax on Wall Street, and I want to see restoration of these revenues that have been removed from the government over the past 10, 15, and 20 years by Republicans whose agenda is only to make life easier for the wealthiest people in the country, which, by the way, 1% of our country now owns 90% of all the wealth. This is a serious problem, and I would work to reverse that to whatever extent possible.
Mr. Pryor.
Yeah, thank you. I would say that my probably largest single, it's hard to single this out, but my largest single legislative accomplishment was the passage of the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. That's the one that kept lead out of toys and made toys safe. There is no doubt that that act has saved lives. It's worked. We worked with business. We worked with consumer groups. We also worked it through the process by the book, exactly like you learn in 8th grade civics, where we had conferences, we had full amendments on the floor and in the committees, and it worked just perfectly. And it's a good example of how bipartisanship works and how we should do things. In addition to that, I've passed about 70 pieces of legislation, almost all of it bipartisan. That's the way I work. In fact, 13 of those bills were for our men and women in uniform and our veterans, and I'm proud of that. But also, I'm proud of the non-legislative accomplishments I've had where I picked up the phone and called a CEO and asked them to do a plant expansion or bring their business to Arkansas, and they've done that. I'm proud to do that. But you know what, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard Congressman Cotton basically admit that he hasn't passed anything since he's been in the House, even though he was there for 1 month and he ran a poll on the Senate race. Didn't even know where the bathrooms were, but nonetheless, now he thinks he's entitled to be in the Senate. And his approach is this my way or the highway, this dead-end politics that leads to things like fiscal cliffs and shutting down the government. Let me say this. Leadership in Washington involves walking across the aisle. And Congressman, you don't have the reputation, the ability, or the desire to walk across the aisle to get things done in Washington.
Mr. LaFrance.
Thank you, sir. I can tell you that I feel no entitlement to this United States Senate seat. But you are entitled to this Senate seat. You, the voters, you, the people of Arkansas. This is your seat, and I want to help you take it back. My key item, my key project will be to get Washington out of our lives as much as possible. When this country was founded, they did not want a society where every decision you make, every turn you take, you have to think about what's the federal government restricting in this, what regulations are here, what regulations are there. This is not a free society where we can own our own lives and our own future. Freedom, it's hard. It's hard work. It takes sacrifice. Politicians in Washington today, they try to make everything better for everybody, taking money from one person, giving it to the other, using wealth transfers to provide favors. It's got to stop. We, individuals, as families and communities, are the owners of our own destiny. And if I go to Washington for you, I'm going to make sure that you have the opportunity to own your future. A couple of key other items real quick. Term limits, as I mentioned. That goes along with my desire to get the influence of money in Washington as limited as possible. I think term limits will be a big help as the days of the career politician are long gone. And I think a significant reduction in federal spending will go a long way. Right now, when we're spending $3 trillion, there are people that are trying to get influence and get access to that money. People rob convenience stores for $100. What are people doing for $3 trillion? I'm going to remove this influence as much as possible and bring this Senate seat back to you. Thank you.
Rebuttal, Mr. Cotton.
Senator Pryor likes to talk about leadership in Washington. I learned leadership in the streets of Baghdad and the mountains of Afghanistan, and let me tell you, you can learn a little bit more there than you can in the halls of Congress. Leadership requires toughness, requires courage. Senator Pryor simply isn't tough enough to stand up to Barack Obama and put Arkansas first. He cast a decisive vote for Obamacare. If it wasn't for his vote, it wouldn't have become law. He's fixes now, but why didn't he demand them then? He had the power to protect Arkansas from all the harms of that law. Senator Pryor likes to talk about how he's led on EPA regulations. Yet we've passed legislation to rein in the EPA. He can't get a vote on it. He likes to talk about the Keystone Pipeline. We've passed legislation that would permit the Keystone Pipeline. He can't get a vote on it. Why is that? Because he likes to talk one way in Arkansas, but then he votes like a liberal when he gets to Washington, D.C. And that's why a vote for Mark Pryor is a vote for Barack Obama.
Our next question from Mr. Thompson, and goes first to Mr. Swaney.
Mr. Swaney, as recently as 2011, the president was willing to cut a deal. He was willing to raise the eligibility age on Medicare. He was willing to make changes to Social Security to the frustration of much of his party's delegation in Washington. But conservatives fought because it included tax increases. He insisted on that. In hindsight, was conservative inflexibility on this matter a mistake?
Yes. Yes, it was. Social Security is one of the most successful programs of legislation that's ever been enacted in the United States of America. And it's not really in trouble. They want you to think that it is, but it's not. It needs a little bit of help. Probably all we really need to do is to remove the cap on payroll taxes. People that make more than $117,000 a year are not paying into the Social Security system. I think that ought to be removed. That may do the job by itself, but if not, what would be left would be a very small % increase in the payroll tax, which, according to the government's figures, would solve the problem for the United States government for 75 years. $5 trillion of the national debt is because the federal government borrowed the money from the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund. If we enact small taxes now, that would be very easy to do. We could eliminate, over that time period, $5 trillion of the national debt and put the Social Security system back on a good foot and put the Medicare system in a solid position. And so I do support tax increases to save the Social Security system, to replenish the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund so that that excellent benefit is available to all Americans from now on.
Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Doug, I think your question was about sort of a global budget deal to try to get, everything on the table, Medicare, Social Security, taxes, entitlements, everything on the table to talk about it. I do support trying to go through that process and getting us to a budget deal to get to a balanced budget. I do. It's hard. don't kid yourself, folks. This is hard, but this is why we run for these offices. We don't run for these offices to get reelected. We run for these offices to get things done. And this is something I've been pushing for years, and I haven't been successful yet, but I haven't stopped trying. The difference in Congressman Cotton and I when it comes to these type of issues is I want to do it responsibly. So, for example, in the last 3 years, I have voted to cut $4 trillion out of spending. Let me repeat that. In the last 3 years, I voted to cut $4 trillion out of spending. In fact, we've had these trillion-dollar deficits. Those are completely unsustainable. If there is good news this year when it comes to the budget, it would be that we're now somewhere down in the range of $400 billion a year. So it's going in the right direction. It's still too much. But here's the key to really getting our budget back on track. We need to work together in a bipartisan way to get this done, and everybody has to agree and hold hands and do it together, like back in the old days when when Tip O'Neill and President Reagan worked out Social Security. We need to have that same kind of leadership, but we need to get the economy rolling again. If we can get the economy rolling again, a lot of the budget problems start to take care of themselves because the revenues come in. That's why I support the American Made Strong package of jobs legislation. We need to focus on the middle class. We need to focus on manufacturing jobs. One of the differences in Congressman Cotton and I, if you look at his votes, he wants to build the economy from the billionaires down. I want to build it from the middle class out.
Mr. LaFrance.
Thank you. These entitlement issues don't have to be hard. It's not the 1930s or the 1940s anymore. We have an opportunity to scale these back, to phase these programs out, and return these tax dollars to the American people, have that money in their pockets, and let them decide what to do with it. For Social Security, my plan is pretty straightforward. For retirees, people near retirement, they're going to see their full benefits. For mid-career workers, they're going to see partial benefits, but they're also going to see a phase-out of their Social Security tax. For younger workers, they're not going to have Social Security benefits. However, the Social Security tax is going to be eliminated for them over the next several years. In addition to what we pay as working Arkansans, our employers also have to pay 7.5% Social Security tax. These taxes, these burdensome regulations, are what are restraining our economy today. It's not that America doesn't have the potential to grow and grow strongly. It's that our businesses can't cope with the regulations, can't cope with the tax burdens. I want to change that, and I want to get our economy growing again. When it comes to programs like Medicare and Medicaid, as I mentioned earlier, these are programs that the government needs to be taking money out of one person's pocket and giving it to another. We can have private charitable organizations set up to assist those that are truly in need, get the medical services that they need. Same thing with the welfare program and the food stamp programs. Government is inefficient. Government is messy. Government is often corrupted. They don't need to have control over this kind of money. It shouldn't be their decision where it goes. The American people are compassionate. We care for each other. And we're capable of helping each other out in times of need.
Mr. Cotton.
The last thing our economy needs is tax increases, and Mark Pryor has voted for every one of Barack Obama's tax increases. When I think about taxes, I think about campaigning down at Cooper Tire in Miller County outside Texarkana. I was actually shaking hands as the overnight shift was coming off. It was dark. Several hundred workers were streaming by. I was trying to shake everyone's hand. And a woman said, as I shook her hand and asked for her vote, that, "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" I said, "Oh, here we go." Miller County has been kind of Democratic, like most of the state has been for a long time. And I said, "Well, ma'am, I'm a Republican." And she said, "Good, because I can't work enough hours to pay all the taxes that are putting on me." And she's right. Working families in Arkansas are suffering from higher taxes day in and day out. We don't have a taxing problem in this country. In fact, last year, the federal government had the highest tax collections that we've ever had in the history of our country. We still have deficits because we have a spending problem. Mark Pryor's solution is to keep increasing taxes. He's never voted against one of Barack Obama's tax increases. In fact, he's voted to raise taxes on wages, on savings, on health care plans, on medical devices. He's even voted to raise taxes on indoor tanning salons. And then he says he wants to cut spending, that he's voted for $4 trillion in spending cuts, and that these deficits are unsustainable. I agree, they're unsustainable. Mark Pryor's voted for every single penny of Barack Obama's $1 trillion a year in deficits on average, every single year, time and time again. That's bad for our economy. It's bad for Americans as well. And it's not something that I'll stand for when I'm your next United States Senator. We have to keep taxes low, simple, and fair, and we have to control spending to get our budget back to balance. That's what I'll do. Mark Pryor won, because Mark Pryor will rubber stamp Barack Obama's policies.
Mr. Swaney, rebuttal.
I believe the subject of this question to begin with was Social Security. And I want to say that I'm a strong supporter of Social Security in its current form, that I believe that a small increase in tax now is amply justified to put Social Security and Medicare on a firm footing for 75 years. And that I think that sometimes I wonder whether or not people think it's a good thing to have old people living under bridges, which is probably what would happen if we eliminated Social Security. So I'm a very strong proponent of maintaining that program, and I think that we do need a slight tax increase. Perhaps it wouldn't even have to happen if we removed the cap on payroll earning for the upper class earners. That might do the job all by itself, but if not, what was left would be very small and easy to accommodate. I know people that are worried about their Social Security. I'm one of them. I'm only 5 years away from my full benefits. I want it.
And with that, we want to thank our panel of journalists for their questions, and time now in our broadcast for closing statements. Again, as was the selection prior to the broadcast, Mr. LaFrance goes first. Sir, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm running for the United States Senate for one simple reason. Because I have 6 daughters of my own. And I do not want them to inherit a country with less freedom and less opportunity than the country that we have been blessed with. We're messing it up right now in Washington. Our economy is stagnant. Our taxes are too high. Federal control over daily matters just continues to grow and grow. Our taxes are too high at the state and local levels as well. Whenever spending goes up too much, they just raise taxes again. Enough's enough. I will not vote for a tax increase of any kind. In fact, I will fight for tax cuts for every American during my term in the U.S. Senate. You know, all I can say as a closing is that this is your country. It's not mine. It's not Tom Cotton's, Mark Swaney's, or Mark Pryor's. It's your country. Your country. This Senate seat is your seat. Whoever you elect should be voting in your best interests, not in their own. Career politicians, their days need to be numbered. I want term limits, and I want to end the days of career politicians. I want to reduce the amount of influence that money has in Washington and its corruptive influence on everything that's done there in town. I want to bring control of your life, of your finances, of your children's education back to you. The federal government doesn't need to be involved. The federal government can protect the country with a strong defensive military and do some other functions, interstate commerce, interstate highways, things like that. That's fine. But they don't need to do wealth transfers. They don't need to take your money and my money and give it to whoever they want, whatever group they want. And I'm going to bring real structural change to Washington, and that's something that none of the other 3 gentlemen up here can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Swaney, you're next.
I want to talk now about something to the audience, both out there in the world and today in the auditorium here. Thank you for attending and being interested. I want to talk about voting. You know, we have a peculiar idea in America sometimes. Sometimes people think you can vote against a candidate. This is really not true. The ballot doesn't have a category that says, which candidate do I hate the most? You can only vote for candidates. And when you vote for a candidate, you need to take some responsibility for that vote after you cast it. Sometimes people will have you believe that you are responsible for candidates you didn't vote for, make you feel guilty. Oh, you didn't vote this way, and so this other guy got in the office. This is false logic. If you don't vote for a candidate, you're not responsible for that candidate if that candidate gets elected. But if you do vote for a candidate, you think he's a bad one, but you vote for him anyway because you think another guy is worse, and that bad candidate gets elected, you have some personal responsibility for everything that bad candidate does. In this election, you're lucky if you're progressive because you have a progressive choice in this race. If you don't want to throw your vote away, doing the same things you've been doing for decades and seeing the country go more and more and more and more conservative, then I urge you to vote green. You won't be sorry about it. You won't have to feel guilty about it later. We have an excellent candidate for the Green Party for governor. His name's Josh Drake. I urge all of you to vote for him. We need to get 3% for Josh so that the Green Party can guarantee that you'll have candidates to vote for in 2016. I urge you to vote green, vote for your life. Thanks very much.
Mr. Swaney, thank you. Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. And Steve, thank you for moderating this. I want to give a special thanks to AETN. You guys do great things. I want to thank my three candidates. I'm up here tonight with these fine candidates. Also, I want to thank University of Central Arkansas for hosting tonight and the journalists. But most of all, I want to thank you, the people of the state of Arkansas. But before I go on with my closing statement, I have to go back for just a minute because Congressman Cotton just told a whopper when he said that I have voted for every single one of Barack Obama's taxes. It's not even close. In fact, I voted against every budget that President Obama has offered. My real record on taxes is I voted to cut taxes by $5.5 trillion since I've been in the Senate. Cut taxes by $5.5 trillion. And I'm a big believer in tax reform. We need to simplify the tax code. We need to lower the rates. But this is more of this fog of misinformation and this rhetoric that Congressman Cotton has gotten so good at doing over the course of this campaign. But again, if you look at his real voting record, what you see in his voting record is these investors, these people who are investing in him and want the big return on his investment, that's who he's listening to. That's who he's carrying the water for since he's been in the House, and that's exactly what he's going to do if he gets elected to the Senate. Listen, he is not listening to you. He's listening to those out-of-state billionaires who are writing those checks, paying for his campaign. In my office, I have a plaque on my desk, and many of you all have been there. It says, Arkansas comes first. This is what I mean by that. I listen to the people of the state of Arkansas. I work hard year after year. I'm ranked as the most independent or one of the most independent senators in Washington. I would very much appreciate your vote. Early voting starts on October 20th, and Election Day is November 4th. Let's go out and win this one, and let's keep this seat for the people of Arkansas. Thank you.
Mr. Pryor is thanked. Mr. Cotton.
I was very blessed to grow up on the cotton farm in Yell County. I'm very blessed now that Ann and I are expecting our first child, a baby boy. We want our baby to have the same kind of opportunities that we did. And I want you and your families to have those same opportunities as well, to have a chance for a better life. Barack Obama's policies are making that harder, though. President Obama said his policies are on the ballot, every single one of them. In Arkansas, the name of those policies is Mark Pryor, because Mark Pryor votes with Barack Obama 93% of the time. And that's why a vote for Mark Pryor is a vote for Barack Obama's failed policies. Mark Pryor supports Barack Obama's failed economic policies, which are costing jobs in Arkansas and driving down wages. Mark Pryor cast a decisive vote for Obamacare, which is driving up the cost of health insurance, and it's hurting Arkansas seniors with its cuts to Medicare. Mark Pryor has voted for every single penny of new debt, $1 trillion on average every year under Barack Obama's 6 years, even while we're cutting $1 trillion from our military. Mark Pryor is a rubber stamp for Barack Obama's failed foreign policy of weakness, hesitation, and indecision. And Senator Pryor won't even hold President Obama accountable for not protecting our country and our families from Ebola. There's a different way. There's the Arkansas way. Let's get our economy moving again. Let's put people back to work so we can have people achieving their dreams. Let's repeal Obamacare and start over on health care reform, trusting Arkansans, patients, doctors, families. Let's balance our budget, quit stealing from our kids, rebuild our military, and keep your family safe and secure, whether the threat is terrorism or disease. This is the choice you face. Barack Obama said his policies are on the ballot, and they are. Here in Arkansas, they go by the name of Mark Pryor. If you're happy with Barack Obama's policies, if you're happy with the status quo, then your vote for Mark Pryor will be a vote for Barack Obama. But if you want change, if you want a new direction for Arkansas and for our country, then I would appreciate your vote.